session 6. It's all about plants. I'm sure everyone knows that this whole topic is very near and dear to my heart. And I hope you've had a really good chance to dive into the resources that we had before tonight's session, and that you have a better understanding of our native plants and how to contend with some of our less savory foes, the invasive plant species. Tonight we're joined by 3 really spectacular folks. But before we do that, just a quick look at our agenda here. I'm going to do some quick introductions of those guys. We're going to cover what we're hoping to learn. And then we're going to jump into a breakout session where each of these presenters will present on a specific invasive. So with that being said, the first presenter we have tonight is Bud Reeves, who is one of Anne Arundel County's county foresters. Bud is a very well-known resource for all things trees in county. And as Suzanne said, and I pre-wrote my introductions tonight, but I also think you guys are going to get a kick out of Bud. Bud will be discussing one of our very most common invasive species tonight, which is garlic mustard. Second tonight, we have Betsy Love, who's a Class 6 steward and St. Luke's Restoration of Nature extraordinaire. Betsy is a force of nature in herself and will be talking about her nemesis, English ivy, tonight. And finally, we have a Class 5 steward, Will Safel, of the red hair. Will, beyond being a steward, is an environmental scientist with Environmental Systems Analysis, or ESA, where he works on planning, permitting, and monitoring restoration and mitigation projects. But sometimes he gets to break out of that and work with his trusty chainsaw to fight some of our invasives. But he's going to be talking about Phragmites tonight. So with that being said, that tonight and everything we've kind of gotten into going into tonight, I really hope that everybody has a firm understanding of the difference between native and invasive species. I hope everyone knows why natives are good. You know, that's kind of a no-brainer. I added a couple really great talks from Doug Tallamy. You know, there's no one better to talk about that than him. But really, the crux tonight is really trying to dive into some of the controls that we have. And what's kind of special about tonight is I've actually asked presenters to stick on for the extended questions session. So if you have invasive particular questions, we'll have a good panel discussion from 7 to 7:30. So with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen in a minute here, but we are going to be breaking into 3 smaller groups tonight. And each of the presenters are going to be kind of cycling through as they did last week. I would ask the folks that are in each of the sessions to mute themselves. The presenters are going to be presenting for just a couple minutes. And there will be time at the end of their presentations to answer questions. So as you're in these sessions, please mute yourself. Any questions you have, go ahead and put into the chat. And there's going to be a staff person who's going to be in with you who will be able to help moderate your questions at the end of the session. So with that being said, I think I'm going to ask our friend Francesca to help us break out here. Francesca, are you ready? I'm going to stop
just sharing. About 1 second.
Okay.
Just doing the introduction.
Whoa, Josh, I just stopped sharing and now I see everybody's faces.
Okay, ready to go. So it should pop up on your screen in just a second. And actually somebody else just joined. So 1 second so I can add them to a room. And then we will be ready to go. Okay. And some of you will be staying in the main room with myself and Betsy. Okay, excellent. So Betsy, I'm going to share my screen with your slides. So if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, we're so glad you're here. So thanks for being here with us tonight.
Well, I just want to say how nice it is to see your face, Francesca, after you helped me with my other presentation. I really appreciated all that help you gave me.
Yeah.
So anyway, yes, I'm Betsy Love, and I was class 6, and my project was the design and permitting of St. Luke's Restoration of Nature, which is a WIP project for the city. But what I'm going to talk to you about tonight is invasive species, the most notorious English ivy. And so when we see the slides, I'll say, I didn't tell everybody that, and now I'm working with the Severn River Keeper on another project on Back Creek. So that's why you might see my title as project manager of the Severn River Keeper program. Anyway, English ivy, the very notorious Hedera helix. And I think everybody probably has seen English ivy, probably you're aware of it, but you might not know how invasive it is and what kind of a monster it can really be for trees and for native flora. So in fact, it starts on the ground, as you know, bought in many, many nurseries that still sell it, garden places, but it's a great, and the reason why it's so it has so invaded so many places is that people found it to be a great alternative to the non-grass areas underneath their trees, because it does grow anywhere and under all kinds of conditions. But there, as you will find out, there are much better alternatives for it. So you don't want to allow it to grow up a tree because that's how it really spreads itself. Next slide, yeah. So you see in this, this is an urban location. This landowner never planted English ivy. And you see by the street there, there it starts. There's the English ivy, and it comes because it grows up the tree and the seeds disperse all over the place. So you might not want English ivy, but you will probably get it, especially in an urban location. So if it's left unchecked, you see what it happens in the right side of this slide. It grows up the tree and it suffocates it. The sunlight can't get to the leaves, and you can see those trees are actually deformed and probably a dead tree underneath. So next slide. So this is where a landowner has controlled it by keeping it off the trees, but yet even if it's left on the ground under the trees, it is suppressing native flora from being able to support wildlife. This is how insects, a lot of the native plants that I'm going to suggest are ones that feed insects and bees and keeps the ecosystem in balance. Next slide. So here's a great photo of I call them tree snatchers, because you can see in the foreground already a tree has died. And this is where you can't see it in the photo, but the landowner has English ivy all over its yard, all over the yard. So it's creeped over to the woods on the other side of their property and already starting to grow up other trees, which could be saved if some watershed steward wanted to take on a project. But they need to be, you can see that the trees still have limbs and all that. So it could be saved, but it just needs to be maintained. So this is the horrible picture that inspires me to go after invasive species. This is what we see so often, or I see very often, as I'm driving down highways, or even when I'm driving into Annapolis on Rao Boulevard. There are trees all along, that beautiful entry into our capital city that have English ivy all over them. And I've spoken to the mayor about it, to try to get Public Works to do something, but It takes master watershed stewards. So if I have inspired any of you to take on an invasive species project, what you need to do is plan your attack and inspire a community. And I mean a lot of people to help you, especially if you're taking on a large area. And you do that by education. And then your force of volunteers is how you will eradicate it. Here I am making friends. You can also make friends as you're doing big projects like this. You can even make a friend in a dumpster. You can see that. So as I was preparing these slides, Unity Gardens sent out this newsletter, as they do very, very often. And right there was this great link to the diversity of native plants that you can use to replace English ivy, because of course, when you take it out, you want to cover the ground so there's no erosion. So here are some of my favorites of full shade. I love the idea of Christmas fern and native violets used together. They're really pretty. But you know, there are others that you can use, like green and gold and pussy toes. And this link here would you know, show you some photos of these various plants, native, that is. And a few tips on how to remove English ivy. First, you want to remove it from the tree itself. So what I did when I had an English ivy situation, cut the vine at the bottom as near to the earth as possible, but you don't remove the vine from the tree, because it's sometimes really embedded into the bark itself, and you can damage the tree that way. So I have used, I just buy Roundup and put it in a little bucket, put on my rubber gloves and my mask, and cut that thing and just paint it. So it's very much controlled. I paint the vine as it's going into the ground, and as close to the ground as possible, you make the cut so that Roundup stops that English ivy source from ever going up your tree again. And if you're gonna do it on the ground, I find either I take a shovel and get it loosened off of the earth, and then roll up the shovel, push the shovel up and roll it up, so you can, and that has the effect of pulling all the vines around it. And you can also do that with a garden rake. You can grab it off of the ground, so you're not spending so much time bending over, you're pulling it up by using your arms. And if you do it in a group of people, that shovel thing really works well. If you line everybody up and you don't have trees and things in your way, you just roll it up. Everybody works in concert, and suddenly your English ivy is gone. So I was going to talk a little bit about being able to use Roundup in the critical area. In Annapolis, if you're in the critical area, you have to have a professional professional licensed person to use something like Roundup, or, you know, these poisonous materials. And I talked to Bud about it earlier today, because I thought that the county was different, and indeed it is. In the county, it's only the 100-foot buffer that you need a professional to do that sort of work in. So this is one project that might really inspire you, and that was Sandy Kirkland, who is also a Master Watershed Steward and a Master Watershed Steward of the Year, removed over 13,000 square feet of invasive species. And here you can see the pictures. On the left is the before, and then the after. all that English ivy and Asiatic bittersweet and multiflora rose was removed, but in 7 days and 170 volunteers. Pretty amazing. And the next slide shows you the critical area that was part of her project, adjacent to a stream. So that's why they were so strict about needing a professional licensed person to help you. So are there any questions? Be happy to answer.
Yeah, we've got a couple that have come through the chat. So one is there an ideal time of year to remove English ivy?
Any time of year you can remove English ivy, but in planting, if you're going to be planting, it's good to plant in early spring or in the fall. Planting in the summer is not good. It's very stressful for plants, and of course winter is no good for that, but you can remove ivy anytime. At any opportunity too.
Yeah. And then, so somebody mentioned that Lynn said her landscape company said the only way is to completely get rid of it after pulling it up is to put layers of cardboard and black plastic on the ground, weighing them down with something heavy like concrete and leaving it for a couple of years. Could you speak to that at all, Betsy?
Well, I haven't had to do that, but I can see where it might be if you don't pull all of the roots up. I mean, you know, leaving one behind, you might come back along and pull it up, but I haven't had to cover anything in my projects, but it probably is not a bad idea. I like to, you know, do it at the same time. I like to pull it up and then put my plants in. So that way you're also, when you're putting your plants in, you're getting rid of any extra little English ivies that might be in the ground as you work the earth for the planting.
Thanks. And then we have another question. So in our pre-materials, one of the videos mentioned to just let the vines lay and die on the site. So after you've kind of cut it. Is there a recommendation for attacking a large area of it? And it says your slide looks like the plant material was removed. So could you speak a little bit to that difference?
Yeah, there's two ways to do it. And when you're working in a large area, especially if you're leaving a lot of ground bare, you need a place for wildlife to hide. So what we did at St. Luke's was make little piles for the box turtles to be able to hide in and that sort of thing, because the vines are going to die there. And, you know, it doesn't really look that bad when you just make these little mounds here and there. It doesn't, you know, look unsightly or anything. It looks like a nice wooded area with little places for wildlife to hide out.
Any other questions? That's all we had in the chat. Feel free to speak up if you have another question.
Yeah.
Francesca, I put one in the chat, but I'll just ask it out loud.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Some trees that I've seen have like a section of the ivy cut out, and it's not near the ground, but it's a little bit higher up, but it's maybe like a foot-long section of the ivy cut out, and the root part is still there, but the vine that's further up the tree is dying. Is that a different approach than what you're describing?
Wow, that might be a case of the vines were cut in the ground and you can't really see it. They don't remove it because, again, it can, the vines, the closer they are to the ground, the thicker the vine is growing up. So it's probably implanted into the tree. So you wouldn't want to do it. But if it's a little bit higher up and someone has a ladder to get up there, why not? If it's not into the bark itself, it gives the tree some oxygen.
One last question. Will these slides be available on the site?
Francesca? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, I saw my email was, that's an old email that was on the on the slide in the very front, and it's betslove@icloud.com. True North is something from my past, my business that I had many, many years ago when I, before my hair went gray.
All right. And then one more question. We're switching in just a minute, but Elmer, could you ask your question? It was just about maintenance, I think it was. Could you speak a little bit to the maintenance of once you've removed the ivy?
Oh, once you've removed it?
I think that's what you're asking. Elmer, do you want to specify?
Yeah, just in terms of follow-up in future years, because a seed that may germinate, because of roots that may have, still be there. Because I cleaned up an area and I have to every year go back and double check everything. And I think that's something worthy of discussion.
Exactly. I can't tell you how frustrating it is when you've, and I'm sure Elmer, you understand this too, when you work so hard and you think you've got it all, and then all of a sudden you walk through your garden and here's some suspect that you haven't seen before. These things come in from everywhere. For instance, there's this new invader, and I guess it's not that new, but I thought it was a native fern. I thought, what a beautiful plant this is. How lucky I am to have this pretty plant come in. And then I had a professional over there and she went, oh my God, you've got Lespedeza in here. This is the worst invader you could ever have. You got to get this out of here right away. And I said, what? What's Lespedeza? She had to show me. And I just felt really stupid because I never even bothered to do a plant ID on it. And I have a great plant ID that I use because there's so many, every time I walk through St. Luke's, I see this new plant that's popping up. And when I, when I do the plant ID on it, my God, it's this really rare plant, this real native plant that has come in, just volunteered. Because if you build an ecosystem and put in all the fundamentals of how a Chesapeake watershed was in the beginning, all these plants just start seeming to come up. And so anyway,
oh, sorry, I think we lost Betsy. All right, so we are switching now to Bud, who should join us in just a second. Sorry, that was supposed to give a bit of a warning. So Bud is going to be joining us. And here he is. Hey, Bud, could you just introduce yourself while I pull up your slides?
Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Bud Rees. I'm a county forester. As anybody doesn't know me, I know most everybody, I think, more than I know. But I'm a county forester. I've been dealing with invasive species since I started working in this county for DNR back in 1994. Wow, it's been a long time. But I'm also on the Invasive Species Council, Maryland Invasive Species Council. And also I'm kind of director of the Weed Warrior program we have. That's an animal weed resistance. We have a website and a Facebook page. I encourage everybody to join. We need all the help we can get. I ran out of time the last session. You keep me moving a little bit and stop from being so long-winded. I tend to ramble on sometimes.
No problem.
Okay, are we ready?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay. Well, I'm here to talk about garlic mustard. The Latin name is on the other slide, is Alaria something or other. Garlic mustard is a herbaceous biennial plant that was first noticed in the United States around 1868, right after the Civil War. It was found on Long Island, New York, and they believe it was probably brought in for food or medicinal purposes. Don't know about medicinal purposes, maybe. But a friend of mine, Carrie Wick, said that she used to make pesto out of it, and made a good pesto. So there you go. It's found pretty much up and down the East Coast, Midwest, a few of the Western states, British Columbia, I think, and even up in Alaska. It's mostly found in dry forests and moist dry forests along the edges and floodplains. You also find it on roadsides. Done like acidic soils. Now, the main reason why we're talking about this today is because the effect it has. Garlic mustard, well, it's not like a normal wildflower that just has one here, then one there. It creates like little banks of it, and almost like a carpet, if you will. And it shades out these other plants. And of course, these plants are all connected with insect species like butterflies and moths and whatnot. They're all part of the food chain. But from a forest standpoint, the issue with garlic mustard is the fact that it's an allelopathic species. If anybody doesn't know what allelopathy is, allelopathic plants are those plants that exude a chemical that suppresses the growth and regeneration of other plants. Classic example of that is a black walnut. If anybody has a black walnut in their yard, you'll notice that nothing grows underneath of it. That's by design. It produces a chemical called juglans, and it keeps other plants from growing. Well, garlic mustard does the same, but it keeps other plants from growing. What it does, what's more important from a forest standpoint is how it affects trees. Is this chemical, and I'm not sure what the name of it is, or even has a name. I'm sure some chemist does somewhere. But it suppresses the mycorrhizal fungi that are associated with the native trees in our forest. Forest trees, I think pretty much all have fungi associated with them that allow they grow onto or into the roots of the tree, and they help the tree absorb water and nutrients. And of course, the tree helps then by passing photosynthase and sugars down to them. Good system. But garlic mustard destroys that, and it keeps in some places it keeps the forest from regenerating itself, which is not good. Okay, now to identify it, you can flip it now. Like I said before, garlic mustard is a biennial. It has a 2-year stage. There's annuals have a 1-year stage. Perennials grow for many years. They just go dormant and then grow again. But garlic mustard is a biennial, so it has a first year is what's called rosette stage, and the second year is a flowering stage. Now, as you see right there, the rosette it's kind of like a little horseshoe shape, kind of roundish, has scalloped edges, like little teeth on it, and they're rounded. And they grow about 4 to 5 inches high, almost like a little petiole itself. But it can sometimes be confused with creeping Charlie. It's another invasive, but not very insidious or anything like that. But the best way to identify it, if you see you think it might be garlic mustard, just pull it up and smell it, crush it and smell it. You'll get that garlicky smell to it. Next one. Yeah, hey, here's well, that's just another. You flip back to the first one. The next one, the previous one. Okay. It's kind of roundish. It has those teeth on the end. Okay, now go to the flowering stage. Next. Okay, that's good right there. The flowering stage, which is the second year, looks totally different. It has a hairy stem, but the most noticeable thing is, aside from the flowers, is the leaves. So you have the leaves that change from a pretty much round to almost a arrow shape, and the scalloping and teeth on the edge start off large and get real small towards the tip. And towards the tip, it'll be entire or smooth. So it's a totally different looking leaf. And I know a lot of people been think they look like two different plants, but you still have that garlic smell. And when it was young, it'll still strong. But once it starts seeding, the garlic smell kind of goes away. It's got four white petals on the flower. And eventually it'll go to this stage. This is after it sets seed, and those are the seeds on there. And the seeds are numerous. There's probably several hundred seeds on what you see right there. They also persist in the soil. They will persist for up to 5 years. So they create like a seed bank. And we get, okay, let's go get a control scale. I guess we gotta.
Okay, sorry,
come
bud.
play here. Okay, next. Okay. Okay, next. Okay, control strategies. Because you have two stages, you're kind of like two strategies, but most of them revolve around pulling them up. In a rosette stage, they pull up easily. They have a real shallow root system. There's no rhizomes or deep roots like some plants, like your vines do. So they'll pull up real easy. And I say apply God's glyphosate for large areas. It's not unusual to have a half acre of this spread all over the place. So if you don't have a lot of time to do it, it might be time to pull some Roundup out of your tool bag and hit it with some Roundup. Because the rosette stage persists through the year, you can time this so like late summer when there's not a lot of herbaceous stuff up, you can spray it then and not have to worry about collateral damage with the wildfire. Like don't even think about spraying it in the spring. Now the flowering stage, you can, again, the best thing to do is just pull the entire plant up, and that's easy because when it's in flower, it'll get 2 to 3 feet tall, so it's really easy. You don't have to bend down very far, just pull it right up. It'll come out by the roots real easy. But what you want to do is, if it's still in flower, pull it up or cut it. You can even cut it more than halfway, so it doesn't like start new flowers again. To pull the whole thing up and let it dry out, and then compost it. However, if it has like that last slide with the seeds, if it has got to the seed stage, you don't want to try to compost it. You want to leave it on the ground. And once they dry out, I didn't have a slide of that. They're really brittle, and if you touch them, they'll just like shatter and just go everywhere. So you're kind of done for the year in that thing. And glyphosate for large areas, that's only when it's in the flowering stage. So you don't want to do that unless you have to. Best thing to do is just pull it up. I have a landowner who was paying her son and daughter $5 a bag for a grocery bag for pulling up garlic mustard. It was a good system. Again, it has a seed bank. So if you start it 1 year, plan on returning back and keep pulling it for the next 5 years. Eventually, you'll get it and get rid of it. But it's a commitment, like a lot of the other things. Okay.
All right, perfect. And we just have a couple of minutes left for questions. One of them you already answered. That was about the rhizomes and the root system. So I think we're good there.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Bud. That was super helpful. Does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah. Other session, people ask about my things on glyphosate, but after everything's done, we'll talk about that. I'm not an advocate of spraying chemicals all over the place, but I realize they're necessary sometimes. So we'll talk about that later. Yeah. Thanks, Francesca.
Yeah, thank you so much. And if you just sit tight for a second, I will shuffle around everybody, and then I can tell you when you can switch. But thank you so much for being here.
Sure. Grab a slug of water.
Yeah. And while we still got you, could you talk a little bit about the difference between the, I think you said it was really similar to Creeping Charlie and how to tell. Oh, you said the garlic was the smell, right?
Yes. Yeah, in Creeping Charlie, the leaves are only about size of $50 or so.
All right.
And then get very tall.
They don't get as tall, you said?
No, it's 2 or 3 inches maybe.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you so much, Bud. And I'm going to send you over to Suzanne's room now.
Okay.
So it should pop up on your screen and you can accept that. All right. Thank you again. All right. Thanks, Will. If you could introduce yourself while I pull up your slides, that would be wonderful.
Sure. Yeah. Hi all. My name is Will Sfell. I went through the program back in 2003, which makes me a Class 5 Master Watershed Steward. Had a lot of fun with it. I'm now an environmental scientist working for a company called Environmental Systems Analysis. And I'm here to talk about Phragmites today. And, whenever you're ready, can you hit the next slide, please?
Yeah.
Thank you. And again, I'm with Environmental Systems Analysis. We're a natural resources management and ecological restoration company based out of Crofton. We do a lot of stream restoration, wetland delineation, mitigation work, as well as shoreline mitigation and stabilization, a lot of design and permitting. But we also do invasive species management. The way that we got into that is that on our mitigation sites, one of the things that you have to do is demonstrate that the wetlands that you built are actually functioning as good wetlands. And one of the boxes that you need to check is that it's not dominated by invasive species. So as opposed to paying a third party to come in and treat the invasive species, we do it all in-house, and that's expanded to become a larger part of our business. Next slide, please. So Phragmites, what is it? It's also known as common reed. If you've been along the coastal systems around here, you've probably seen it. It's pretty conspicuous. It's a 13-foot tall reed that grows in these large monotypic stands. It's a wetland adapted plant, but it grows in a wide variety of regimes. Usually it hides or hangs out in the peripheral of the wetlands, but it can grow in several inches of water up and into the dry habitats around it. It's salt tolerant, it's a tough plant. It can grow in a wide variety of soil conditions, and you can find it within Maryland anywhere from Assateague Island all the way up to the Piedmont. I haven't seen it in the mountains, but I wouldn't be surprised if you did. Next slide, please. Here's a map of its distribution throughout the country. It's throughout the lower 48. It's on every single continent besides Antarctica. And its taxonomy is a little disputed. There's several subspecies of it. One of them is actually endemic to North America. But the one that you're most likely going to be dealing with, and the one that forms these really large monotypic invasive stands, are going to be the invasive variety. Next slide, please. So what makes it invasive? Again, it forms these really dense monocultures. It grows really quickly. It can grow 16 feet in every direction per year. And the shame about this stuff is that it has this really huge above ground biomass, but nothing really eats it. So when I'm walking through these things, I kind of feel like I'm in an ecological food desert where there's all this like potential food and all this potential habitat, but there's nothing in it. It's kind of a shame. Next slide, please. What you would see otherwise, especially in coastal systems, is something like this. And the graphic below is a cross section of what you would see from a transitional zone from the open tidal areas up until the uplands. And what you'll see usually in the low marsh is going to be Spartina alterniflora transitioning to Spartina patens in the upper tidal marsh, which will then give way to switchgrass in the high marsh and eventually into trees. So what you see is several different species occupying different hydrological and salinity niches. But instead what you get now is Phragmites throughout the entire thing. So where you would have several species and huge biodiversity, you get a monotypic frag stand. Next slide, please. And I like this shot right here because it really illustrates just how dense this stuff is. Like there's physically no room for other plants to be growing. It's several inches deep, the water that is. So it's really just tough environment for other plants to grow in. And ephemeral wetlands are basically, or emergent wetlands basically are sun-loving species assemblages. And what you do is get this 13-foot tall with a closed canopy, and everything just gets choked out and it's starved for sunlight. Next stand, please. So you got frag and you want to kill it. Time to come up with a plan, right? One of the things with treating frag, especially within these really mature stands, is that it's going to be a multi-year effort. You're not going to get under control just because the root systems are so extensive and so dense. These efforts are usually really front-loaded. So the first year is going to be your real big push. But in the following years, you're going to start transferring into more of a maintenance regime where you're really just able to go out and do spot treatments on individual plants. It's not uncommon to have multiple invasive species on a job, and it's not uncommon to use multiple treatment techniques on a job. Next slide, please. Yeah, so what options do you have? Mechanical is a very viable option, especially in more upland and dry areas. This is exactly what it sounds like, where you're manually cutting down the plant by either mowing it, digging it up, or cutting it with like weed whackers. This is great in the uplands, but again, you can't really do it in the wetlands just because it gets too soupy. You're not going to need equipment back in there, especially on these large jobs. And the idea is just to exhaust the root system. Another treatment option that we use a lot is herbicides, and this is often used in conjunction with mechanical treatment. And this stuff is really effective because it gets at the roots. So what you do is you spray on an herbicide, it gets absorbed by the plant, it goes down to the roots, and you can get really great treatment efficacy in the first year. And it's just really effective. The downsides are that it's non-selective, so you're going to be taking out some other desirable vegetation, but it's like you have to kind of clear the area out so that you can create a good canvas to get some good stuff in there in the following years. There are some stipulations that go along with this, especially working within wetlands in the critical area, and large projects require a license to do. I'll discuss that a little more later. Next slide, please. But if you are treating, there's a couple tricks that you'll want to follow. Treatment in the late summer and in the fall is going to be the most effective. Basically wait until the tassels and the big flowering heads start to appear, and you should have some good luck with it. If you can hit it from an elevated position, as with this fellow in the picture right here, you're going to be able to really get a lot of coverage on those plants, so the uptake will be really great. We buy a lot of the chemicals individually and mix them ourselves. You want to go ahead and use a thing called a surfactant as well as a dye. And the surfactant is also known as a sticker spreader. It really helps ensure that it sticks on the plants and that it gets taken up by the plants. So that way you're not wasting chemical. It's not running off into the environment. It's actually getting where you want it and being used. You're not using too much. If you're doing herbicides, you definitely want to watch the weather. You can't do it in high wind conditions, or else it's going to drift and hit non-target stuff. And you don't want to do it before it rains, or else it's going to get washed off, and that's not great either. Again, it's going to be a multi-year effort. I don't know if I want to get too far into this, but if you're doing large scale operations, or if you're doing wetlands or critical area treatments, you're going to need to be certified to do it, or else you might get fined. If anybody has a specific project that they want to discuss, I'd be happy to go over it with you and to see if you actually need a certified applicator on site or not. But to do this, you have to be a trained professional that's undergone formal training as well as continued education per year. You have to be certified per environment that you're using, and you have to keep really good records and reporting. You also have to follow safety and PPE protocols, keep spill kits on site, and just make sure that everybody's being safe about it. Next slide, please. There are two other methods I want to call out. We don't use them very often for a variety of reasons, but they're definitely viable when the projects allow for it. Grazing can be great with, say, goat or cattle. They can be tricky, but basically it's the same as mechanical treatments, where you're just exhausting the root system and getting all that nutrient worn out. Next slide, please. You can also do burns. These can be tricky because you're letting a large area on fire, but it's really great especially for first year treatment, where you can really treat large areas of above ground biomass, and it's a great surge of carbon into the system to make a really fertile environment, but it doesn't treat the roots. And so you're gonna have to have some form of follow-up treatment with it. Next slide, please. Yeah, and then with that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
That's great. Thank you so much, Will. So we have one question about the recommended eradication plan for Phragmites that have overtaken a stormwater pond. So one that started as a dry pond, but has become something like a constructed wetland. Yeah, so a lot of these are site-specific plans that you don't want to look at and go, but that sounds to me like it would be a maintenance issue where the system has filled in too much and needs to be dug out again. So that would be a mechanical treatment where you'd probably go in with equipment and dig it out to go back to the original design specs. And then you have to be really careful what you do with that material, because the rhizomes, and they're very viable and they can go somewhere else. So you want to make sure that's disposed of correctly. And that would probably involve taking it to the dump at a proper facility and everything. Great. And if anybody else has questions, feel free to speak up. You don't need to type it into the chat. No one?
I actually might elaborate. I asked the question about the stormwater pond,
Sure.
And we have the challenge that pond drains into a key creek in our subwatershed, watershed system. So the eradication effort, we don't want to damage water quality, but it sounds like you would have to just restart and rebuild the pond, it sounds like.
Yeah, it sounds to me, and, you know, not being familiar with the project, is that
Sure.
perhaps the system is no longer functioning as designed.
Right.
And that would mean that it would have to be, basically it'd have to have the maintenance done to it, which would get it back to the original function, right? And to me, just from what you're saying, it seems like you'd want to, you know, get a contractor in there with some equipment to, you know, put it back to the original design specifications. That would be the easiest thing, but then there's always fun opportunities for BMP retrofits and everything. Maybe do something more exciting in there.
Right, right. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
But if you just wanted to do the frag, I think for that, either you can go in there, if it's controllable, go in there with the weed whacker 6 times a year until you exhaust it, or hit it with some herbicide. You know, that sounds like a system where you would want somebody certified to do herbicide.
Right.
Yeah.
Will, could you talk a little bit, like once you've kind of done that first year and a couple years and you've got most of it gone, can you talk a little bit about like keeping an eye on it and like how to kind of keep it at bay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the cool thing about this is like the first year is always kind of dramatic because you're really knocking back a large system. But you often have a really great seed bank underneath all that. So after the first year, you're going to have a lot of cool stuff popping up underneath it that's just been waiting for the sunlight and the right conditions. So you might have all the native species sitting there waiting for you. And so it's not uncommon for us to not need to do any back planning whatsoever as we start to transition into like year 3 or so. But yeah, it's like, again, everything's very site specific, but if you have, you're going to be, if you have nice areas around you that aren't going to have chronic input from Phragmites, I mean, yeah, go into a maintenance mode, walk out there once a year, you know, knock back the ones that are starting to pop up. But the real key thing is to stay on top of it. And as with any invasive species management, it's an ongoing, continuous effort. Invasive species are always trying to get a foothold.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have another question?
Will, you mentioned about if you do mechanical or, well, I guess manual removal, taking it to the dump. Are you saying that as soon as you can, you need to sort of contain what you're pulling out because the seeds are moving around or the rhizomes are moving around or whatever?
Yeah, it's like with any invasive species, once you start moving it around, you open yourself up to issues with spreading it to other places, right? So for us on our jobs, we don't haul off site, we leave it all there. But that might not be desirable for a lot of other sites. But yeah, it's like, you know, bag it or take it to the dump immediately, right? The good thing about it is that the seeds on Phragmite are largely non-viable. It really doesn't spread via seed frequently at all. I'd say 95+% of spread is through the rhizomes. So you really want to make sure that if you're only cutting the above ground biomass, take it to the dump, make sure it's disposed of properly. If you're digging, you know, it's the same story. Just be really careful about those rhizomes.
That's great. Thank you so much. We just have a few seconds left and everybody else will be joining us again. But thanks again, Will, for sharing your knowledge on this. You made it sound a lot less intimidating, that's for sure.
Sure. No problem.
All right, so I think everybody's here, and Josh is going to go ahead and fill us in on what's next.
I think Suzanne's covering the dates, aren't you, Suzanne?
Yes, yes. So a couple things for the next month or so. So today your capstone form part 1 and your community presentations are due just by putting them in your Google Drive. If you have any trouble with that, you can see Francesca at the 7 o'clock hour and she'll help you. And just for the next 2 weeks, you're going to get an opportunity to give your community presentation to your pod, which leads me to an important PSA. We've had some anxiety about community presentations and the fact that you have to know what your capstone project is by your presentation. And just to be clear, your presentation is really about your assessment. It's not about your project. So you do not need to present what you're doing. You don't even need to know what you're doing. All you're going to do is share your observations of your environmental and your social assessment, and then talk about how that might lead you to ideas for the types of projects you might want to do. So if you have any questions about that, but really whatever you made is great. You're going to share it with your pod and have a nice discussion. February 19th, Friday. So Josh has been working on your GIS homework. He's been getting through that, and he promises to get people feedback by Friday. So we'll hold him to that. For you Rainscapers, the next step for you is your site visit with Josh. So I'll be actually sending around a little scheduling form to everyone that will help us figure out our new pods. There'll be new pods that will start the week of March 8th. And they'll also help Josh schedule site visits. So look for that from me tomorrow. And just know that Josh will be working to batch his site visits so that he's visiting the same area of the county efficiently. So he'll be organizing those, and hopefully those will start on Monday. And if you're not ready for a site visit, if you're like, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't even know where to go, you do not have to have a site visit right this second. So you can say that also on your form. The week of March 2nd, so not next week, but the week after, that's crazy, I think. We don't have any class and we don't have any pods. And the reason for that is that is the week of our annual conference. It's March 5th and 6th. Many people have registered as a steward in this class. You can register for $10. And so we'll be taking a week hiatus, no class, no pods, except for Josh's group. He'll have his on Monday because that's the way their schedule is. And then the last thing is the week of March 8th, we're gonna be in new pods. So hopefully you've had a good chance to get to know 4, 5, 6 different stewards that are in your class, but we're going to mix it up so that you can get to know a different group of people. So Josh, next slide. Okay, what's next? Session assessments. Thank you for people who have been doing their session assessments. It really helps us to know if we've missed the mark, which we definitely are actually revising next week's class based on some feedback that we got in some content we presented during session 1. So it's really, really helpful, and it lets us know if we didn't get if we did not meet our learning outcomes. So definitely do those assessments. Next week we have Rainscaping 201. So we'll be talking all about all the different rainscaping practices, where to put them, where not to put them, solutions for common problems that people have in their yard. But I wanted to signpost that, if you went to session 7 now, you would see in the pre-assignments, the pre-session assignments, you've got stuff to read and view, and you've got stuff to explore. And usually your reflection is, hey, just write down the questions that you have. But this week, there'll actually be a little bit of a deeper reflection. So Josh is going to send you on a wild goose chase to learn about one rainscaping practice of your choice, and you'll actually have to share what you learn as part of the reflect portion. So be sure to do that before class next week. And then just a last plug, if you are not signed up to the come to the conference, you do not want to miss it. It's going to be great. If you have any questions about the conference, Francesca is organizing it, so you can feel free to reach out to her.
All right. So for our extended time tonight, as Suzanne mentioned, our speakers, Bud, Betsy, and Will, have graciously agreed to stay on to answer questions. So that will be in the main room here. And then we'll also have a tech help group with me and native plants with Josh. So it's just shown up on your screen. If you take a second, you can look on the bottom of your screen. It should say breakout rooms, and you can choose the one that you would like to go to. So go ahead and try to do that. If you're in the tech help one, I'll be there soon. I'm going to sit tight and help people kind of get to their one place they need to go really quick so our speakers can have this area. So if you are unable to click that and you need a room, then type it in the chat and I'll send you there.
And if you just want to sign off, if you've had enough of plants for tonight, or if you have something else to do, you don't need to stay. But just for those that are interested in the extended discussion, you're welcome.
Where'd I go?
Hi, Bud. You're still here with me. You're staying right here.
I don't see anything.
You don't see us?
No.
Oh.
We see you.
How do I get back there?
So on the side of my computer, I find the, okay, good.
Okay, let's.
Okay, so does everybody in this room going to stay on with invasives? Okay, perfect.
No.
Oh no, Diane, sorry, Diane.
Native plants, please.
Okay,
Thank you.
That was Diane Hill. And how about you, Diane Ray?
You're on mute.
Yeah, I need some tech help.
Okay, perfect.
Francesca, me as well.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I think we're good.
All right. So this is a free-for-all with our presenters. So if you have a question, just raise your hand and we'll go one at a time.
Bring it on.
So, oh, go ahead, James, or Jim, sorry.
Yeah, someday I'm going to change that. I just keep forgetting. Morning glory. Is that an invasive?
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. I feel better. I've been, it was all over my yard. We moved here 2 years ago, and the first year was the ivy and morning glory. First morning glory, and then I started getting that after the ivy. But yeah, that's a pesky little bugger too.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, I believe there's a couple of varieties of it.
Of the Betsy, I think you're the one that kind of highlighted this, but of the in full shade under the tree, which is the one you've seen that has worked the best here in the local area?
I like Christmas fern. It's very hardy, and it's evergreen, and you know, it loves shade and it thrives there. So I think it's great. But I also like native violet, and a lot of people tell me I'm crazy because it's invasive, but I think it's beautiful and it works really nicely with Christmas fern. You know, you can do a line of that and a line of you can landscape with it. It's pretty.
Cool. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. All right, Stacey, then Jamie.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that it's invasive because it is native, and it does have it's a host plant for the fritterly butterfly. So there's lots of advantages to using it. But I would say also you don't want to probably just pick one, but multiple things. And I think Christmas fern and the Allegheny Pachysandra that you mentioned are a good combination as well.
Yeah.
And although that Allegheny, the native Pachysandra, is a little slow growing, it's not as aggressive as the non-native Japanese one, but it's a pretty combination with the Christmas fern.
Yes.
Yeah, a lot of your ferns do well in the understories. Yeah, but a lot of the ferns, they have really specific moisture requirements. So, like hay-scent fern, is native and it likes like dry woods, but it can get out of hand too. So, but I agree with Betsy. Christmas fern, you can't go wrong with that. Plus, it's evergreen too. It's green in the winter time.
Yeah.
Jeannie, go ahead.
So
have any of you had any experience with removing bush killer? It's been kind of a project in our neighborhood, and I kind of thought about it when Will was talking about chemicals, because we think we might have to go that route. It is in a critical area. It's easing into people's personal property who don't want to take care of it as well. So it's become really, really bad for us.
Yeah, and we're pretty much the only location, I think, in all of Maryland, known location for bush killer. So it's pretty obnoxious.
I've been to some trainings a couple of years ago, and that was I first started hearing about it maybe 2 or 3 years ago, and I haven't actually seen it yet, but from when I hear it's just as bad as you're saying.
Come on out on a Wednesday.
It's like an emerging species, right, of concern.
So we have a weed warrior program that we do in our neighborhood, and we're going to be tackling every invasive you can, starting with garlic mustard, then English ivy and bush killer. So help yourself in our neighborhood. We got it all.
Where are you?
Cape St. Clair.
Cape St. Clair.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where I heard first heard bush killer was in Cape St. Clair. Yeah, from what I understand, you might be relegated to having to use Roundup, maybe. But it's the way it gets all over, like a desirable.
Yeah, we actually had a sprayer for a while that was in there spraying the bush killer, and then there were some conflicts with neighbors, and he got angry and quit. And so I have a new contact that we might try using, but we have to get the neighbors on board, because we're attacking it in the center, but on the property lines of the neighbors, they're not doing anything about it. And like I said, they've had issues with us, so we need to get them on board before we can start spraying.
That's one of the hardest parts of like trying to deal with invasive is getting everybody on the same page. Especially with things like that's pretty easy, like bamboo, for a classic example. If everybody didn't go after bamboo at one time, it's not going anywhere. It's just going to keep going. That's true for a lot of them.
Yeah.
A lot of times you'll have like one parcel that'll be like the seed source for the rest of the neighborhood, and they're not doing anything, but everybody else is fighting for the lives to keep from getting engulfed.
Yeah, we kind of see that sometimes too. On like, we'll be contracted to go out and do these one-time treatments and not without any follow-up, and we go back there and knock it back really good 1 year, but the adjacent parcels are covered in frag or whatever it happens to be, and it comes right back in the following couple of years. And you really have to have a continuous application of effort, or you got to get the whole seed shed, so to speak, really hammered.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
One of my favorite sayings, and she didn't originate this, I'm sure, but Jennifer Vaccaro always says, invasive control is not a project, it's a process.
Yeah.
It's a continual, And so I wonder, Bud, if you could just say a couple words about the Anne Arundel weed resistance.
Okay.
I know that people watch Natasha's videos that she made for us from last spring. They had that to view, but could you just let people know a little bit about what it is and how they can get involved?
Okay, sure. Yeah, the weed resistance is our name. I came up with the name, but anyhow, it's our weed warrior program. Everybody else calls themselves a weed warriors, and I want to be different. So you can be a weed warrior of the weed resistance. Anyhow, we were funded. We're organized by the Anne Arundel County Forestry Board. Secured a funding for it and got everything organized. This is our 4th year. Unfortunately, this past year, we didn't get our grants, and we don't have a volunteer coordinator right now. You're looking at them. And I'm crazy busy, and it's kind of I don't want to say dormant, but I haven't been as attentive as I need to be. Well, that being said, we do have a training videos. We also, I'm planning on doing some training sessions sometime in the next month or two. Of course, COVID hasn't helped anything because a lot of us hands-on. But our volunteers or our weed warriors are, some of them are connected with parks, and they work on a particular park. Some of them just work all over the place. We got a couple very mercenaries, I guess you would call them, that work anywhere. But we have tools. We have a cache of tools. We have loppers and all kinds of hand trimmers and bow saws and everything else. Gloves that we can use to organize events. We do have a website. And it is Ann_Rundle_we_resistance.org, I think.
So we said that's on the slide. When you guys see the session slides, it's on Bud's introduction slides. So you can always get it there too. Okay,
good. And we also have a Facebook page. And again, I'm good at posting good, funny things on Facebook, but I'm not very good at it then. But we do have a Facebook page. You can find information there, and Natasha put up a lot of links on there, so you can find information on that. And if you're interested, or anybody or a group, of any groups that are interested, like Cape St. Clair, if you need our help, let me know. We'll work something out. Well, because we have we don't have a coordinator, we still want to be useful. So a week or two ago, well, maybe it's been a month ago, we had a meeting with all the tree planting people, and WSA was involved with that with Josh and a few others. Were you there, Suzanne?
No, just Josh and Gray from our shop.
Okay, and that's something else I got to work on. We're trying to make sure that the tree plans we do are effective. And one of the biggest things that we found over the years, and I found over my career, which has been quite long, is when you plant trees, maintain them. You can't just plop them in the ground and think great things are going to happen. Sometimes it will, but most times it won't, because you have invasives coming in all the time. That's like the wild card these days with tree planting is invasives. And so we're going to try to coordinate with the other groups, like watershed stewards that are doing tree plantings, but tree troopers, Chesapeake, Alliance for Chesapeake Bay, Anne Arundel Rec Parks. Anybody's doing tree planting, we want to offer our services to help either prepare the site, or maintain the sites that are already planted. Because one of the things that happens is people plant trees and they go, off the next project, and they never go back and see what's going on with the other trees they already planted. There are things like taking stakes off, like taking the wires off of the trees and keeping the weeds away from them, redoing the mulch, things like that. So that's where the weed resistance is right now. It's kind of a skeleton crew right now. But we're still active, and we still have volunteers that are ready to go. So, and we're welcoming anybody that wants to join with open arms. We have pretty much comprehensive training videos, and we'll get some on-the-job training or in-person training here soon, I hope. Anybody gotten vaccinated? Anybody gotten vaccinated yet?
Betsy has.
Oh, Jed, good. Oh, that's right. Yeah, I saw that. But anyhow, that's a weed resistance. Any questions about it, or
also other questions for any of the speakers on any invasive that they presented on, or any other?
Well, the first session I did with Josh, the idea of glyphosate came out, and that came up as a. But I don't see Diane here. He brought it up, and she wanted to. And Josh wanted to know my thoughts on glyphosate, and basically what it is, it's a tool in your toolbox. There are certain species that you really need herbicides in order to effectively control. Things like Atlantis or Tree of Heaven, Phragmites. I mean, you can't control it. Most of these are.
And if you're in wetlands too, right? You can't get equipment back in wetlands, so you're gonna have to go in there and spray.
Yeah. Other things like kudzu. Of course, they say the only way to get rid of kudzu problem is to sell the property and move away.
Right.
I love
that. But even on easier species like garlic mustard, I was talking about garlic mustard. If you have a half acre or an acre of it, and you have to pull up 400,000 plants, that's going to take you a while.
Yeah, it's going to go to seed before it gets to the other side.
Yeah, like on the bright side, you won't run out of a job, but you chances it. But the downside, you'll probably die on the job because you'll never finish. Keep it in your toolbox, but just pull it out when you need to. And that's when the species that you actually need it for, like the Atlantis and other thing. Some of your vines, like it works. It's really good to do if you have big bittersweet to paint the stubs and not try to dig it out. Just get a herbicide and soak it into the bark and do it that way. But it is a chemical. Now I don't believe it's as toxic as people think it is. I don't think there's research to show it, but it is still a chemical. And something could be offensive, but I have a brother who works for Mass Transit Administration on the light rail. And he was out, apparently they sprayed the weeds along the rail, and he was out looking at the track. He does track maintenance and stuff like that. He's a trained freak. And he brushed against it, and his arm broke out. So some people are, even glyphosate, which is supposedly so safe, not as safe as they think. But it's like having a chainsaw. You don't want to use a chainsaw to cut your hair, but if you're going to have a tree to cut down, you want to eat it. So that's my take on glyphosate for what it's worth.
Yeah. Wear your PPE.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Exactly. And actually follow the label. If you have to use a herbicide, by all means, please follow the label directions. What happens is people say, well, if 2% is better, or 2% is good, why don't I use 4%? You're not supposed to do it that way. If it's not, the site's not labeled, like Will does Phragmites, and you can't use regular Roundup on Phragmites. You have to use an aquatic version of glyphosate.
Mm-hmm.
Because the surfactants and other stuff that are in Roundup are what's really toxic to the aquatic organisms. You know, the chemical glyphosate itself is not toxic to the organism, but the spreader stickers and any foaming agents and all the other stuff they put on there, that's what's toxic. So, make sure if you choose something, make sure it's labeled for like outside ornamentals or aquatic, like Rodeo was the aquatic version of Roundup.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure it's labeled for that site.
Mm-hmm. And we'll do both products on a site too, because it'll extend out of the wetland sometimes. And we'll figure out like where's the wetland lined, and we'll use the Roundup Pro in the upland because it's far more effective. But then when we actually are working the wetlands themselves, we'll use the certified products for that. You know, so I mean, we'll use the right tool for the job. If you've got them both, put them to work, right?
Yeah. One of the properties of glyphosate, it'll roll off plants real easy, and that's why all the stuff they put all this stuff in there to make it stick to the plants.
Mm-hmm.
It makes it hard when you're doing Phragmites, but what can you do?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm remembering back when Betsy was doing St. Luke's and Sandy Kirkland was doing the big invasive removal, and you would look at the woods and like you couldn't see anything, and I thought, you're crazy, you can't remove all those invasives with volunteers. It cannot be done.
Yeah.
And I wonder if Betsy, if you could just say a couple words about any like tips and tricks on like getting a large group of people to do that removal, anything that like stands out that made that process successful, because I know I didn't say, but I was like, oh my gosh, good luck, but they did it.
You didn't try to stop her. You said, okay, girl, go ahead, you do it. Anyway, yeah, well, first of all, you know, you have to inspire the community. You have to build the case of the values that will be on the other side of it, what you're doing for the common good, what you're doing for wildlife, and you can really get people to come out for things like that. And, you know, you always want to feed them. You want to feed them. Is a good thing, and people will, you know, will come back the next time, because, you know, we didn't spend a lot of money on it, but, you know, hot dogs and, you know, pastries and coffee in the morning, and it makes people know that you really appreciate them. And also to try and look for groups that, like Bud just mentioned, Weed Warriors, to fill in and help with your community. Like we used the Naval Academy, the Midshipman Actions Group that adopted St. Luke's. This one guy, you have to go make a presentation to it's a woman who, I can't remember her name now, but if you look on the website in the community outreach area, there is a lady's name, and I can't remember her name.
This is for Midshipman?
Yes, and she will invite you to come and make a presentation to them. There's about 250 of them that come and listen to a wide variety of different types of community needs. And I made my presentation, and this, you know, really handsome surfer guy came over to talk to me from California, and he said, I really want to help you because, you know, I can't stand that beach tar on my feet. And he did. He stuck with me for 3 years, and he was so proactive that, you know, he'd call me in the spring before I even started planning, early like February, and said, let's put some dates on this calendar, just to, you know, you can really find wonderful people like that out there that just want to do community service. Let's see, where else did there used to be a group from a church that that did that. What was it? Reverend.
That's Cat Filter.
I don't think it's going up anymore. You remember him? The Creek.
Johnny Calhoun.
Yeah,
Our Creeks and Conservancy. Yeah.
Right. Yes, and that was a very good idea that he had in enabling people to find jobs in the environmental community and inspire them that way. And it actually happened that like 3 years later, this lady shows up at St. Luke's one day on a volunteer day, and she has a National Park Service uniform on, and she says, "Do you remember me?" And I said, "Yeah, you look really familiar." She said, "I met you with Reverend Calhoun in the group, and you so inspired me that I applied for a job and got it, and here I am." She supervises groups now. Isn't that wonderful?
Cool.
So,
awesome.
do this type of work, you can really change, people's ideas and lives.
Well, we'll just have just a few tiny minutes left. I just want to check in to see if anybody has any last burning questions about invasives, or if you want to follow up with any of Betsy's great explanation. Any last questions before we sign off?
Well, just real quick, I'll echo what Betsy says. If you inspire volunteers, they'll take care of themselves in a sense. Of course, you gotta get donuts and coffee. It helps, like you said. But I have several from the Weed Warrior program who are just dedicated to working and removing vines and anything they can get their hands on, because they believe in what they're doing, and get people to believe in how important it is, and get them to understand that you got them. It's to me it's rewarding to see people be that passionate about what I'm passionate about too. So
yes,
kind of spreading the gospel, as it were.
Exactly. Yes.
In a sense.
We also have good luck recruiting National Honor Society students and other groups like that need service hours. And I've gotten quite a nice core of people from that, and they, they're helpful, and they want to help out, and they're service oriented a lot of times. So they're not there just for the hours, but.
I like bribery.
Bribery
works for me.
Yeah.
That's good. Good, yes.
Yeah, we've had people contact people who had community service album from the court system, where they had to do some community service album hours, and we said, sure. Of course, we're not sending murderers or anything like that, jaywalkers and whatnot. But they were, they were just great. They worked hard, and one guy, he had to do 6 hours and wound up doing 16 hours. He worked 2 days.
Wow.
I still believe in people, so.
That's great. That's an uplifting tip to end on.
Yeah.
Sometimes we think we're healing the earth, but the earth is really healing us.
Ah, beautifully said.
Yeah.
That's so true. So true.
All right. So I think it's time to say good night. I should sing a song, but I don't know that you want to hear me sing.
There's Kumbaya. Do it for us.
I was thinking, good night, sweetheart. Well, it's time. Anyway, thank you to Will and Betsy and Bud for being here so much. I learned a lot. Plus, it was fun to see you, and I miss you.
We miss you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Last year has been definitely weird.
It has been.
Yeah.
It's been so weird.
I cannot wait for my second vaccine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like,